Hello guys, and welcome to this video. I'm so glad you're here. I'm so glad I'm going to share with you this story of an incredible woman known as Rahab, and I hope you join me while I tell the story and we share in this moment. Let's get started. Joshua chapter 2 verse 1 to 24. And Joshua the son of Nun sent 2 men secretly from Shittim as spies, saying, "Go, view the land, especially Jericho." And they went and came into the house of a prostitute, whose name was Rahab, and lodged there. And it was told to the king of Jericho, "Behold, men of Israel have come here tonight to search out the land." Then the king of Jericho sent to Rahab, saying, "Bring out the men who have come to you, who have entered your house, for they have come to search out all the land." But the woman had taken the 2 men and hidden them, and she said, "True, the men came to me, but I do not know where they were from. And when the gate was about to be closed at dark, the men went out. I do not know where the men went. Pursue them quickly, for you will overtake them." But she had brought them up to the roof and hid them with the stalks of flax that she had laid in order on the roof. So the men pursued after them on the way to the Jordan, as far as the fords, and the gate was shut as soon as the pursuers had gone out. Before the men lay down, she came up to them on the roof and said to the men, "I know that the Lord has given you the land, and that the fear of you has fallen upon us, and that all the inhabitants of the land melt away before you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea before you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the 2 kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, to Sihon and Og, whom you devoted to destruction. And as soon as we heard it, our hearts melted, and there was no spirit left in any man because of you. For the Lord your God, He is God in the heavens above and on the earth beneath. Now then, please swear to me by the Lord that as I have dealt kindly with you, you also will deal kindly with my father's house, and give me a sure sign that you will save alive my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all who belong to them, and deliver our lives from death." And the men said to her, "Our life for you was even to death. If you do not tell this business of ours, then when the Lord gives us the land, we'll deal kindly and faithfully with you." Then she let them down by a rope through the window, for her house was built into the city wall, so that she lived in the wall. And she said to them, "Go into the hills, or the pursuers will encounter you, and hide there 3 days until the pursuers have returned. Then afterward you may go your way." The men said to her, "We will be guiltless with respect to this oath of yours that you have made us swear. Behold, when we come into the land, you shall tie this scarlet cord in the window through which you let us down, and you shall gather into your house your father and mother, your brothers and all your father's household. Then if anyone goes out of the doors of your house into the street, his blood shall be on his own head, and we shall be guiltless. But if a hand is laid on anyone who is with you in the house, his blood shall be on our head. But if you tell this business of ours, then we shall be guiltless with respect to your oath that you have made us swear." And she said, "According to your word, so be it." Then she sent them away, and they departed, and she tied the scarlet cord in the window. They departed and went into the hills and remained there 3 days until the pursuers returned. And the pursuers searched all along the way and found nothing. Then the 2 men returned. They came down from the hills and passed over and came to Joshua the son of Nun. And they told him all that had happened to them. And they said to Joshua, "Truly the Lord has given all the land into our hands, and also all the inhabitants of the land melt away because of us." So that is the first time we encounter Rahab. She hid the spies of Israel in her house, and I just love that about her. Joshua 6:20-25 says, "So the people shouted, and the trumpets were blown. As soon as the people heard the sound of a trumpet, the people shouted a great shout, and the wall fell down flat, so that the people went into the city, every man straight before him, and they captured the city. Then they devoted all in the city to destruction, both men and women, young and old, oxen and sheep, and donkeys, with the edge of a sword. But to the 2 men who had spied out the land, Joshua said, Go into the prostitute's house and bring out from there the woman and all who belong to her, as you swore to her." So the young men who had been spies went in and brought out Rahab, and her father and mother and brothers and all who belonged to her. And they brought all her relatives and put them outside the camp of Israel. And they burned the city with fire and everything in it. Only the silver and gold and the vessels of bronze and of iron they put into the treasury of the house of the Lord. But Rahab the prostitute, and her father's household, and all who belonged to her, Joshua saved alive, and she has lived in Israel to this day, because she hid the messengers whom Joshua sent to spy out Jericho. So that is the story of Rahab according to the book of Joshua. Some of the things that I want to share with you guys of what I learned from the story of Rahab are the fact that the Bible mentions that Rahab was a prostitute. That was so interesting for me to find. Like, there's a prostitute mentioned in the Bible. I did not know that before reading this book. I don't think I even knew of Rahab, but getting to know that she was a prostitute and her name was mentioned in the Bible. Like, the Bible did not hide the fact that she was a prostitute and say like, oh yeah, there was a prostitute. There's no need to mention her name because she was a prostitute. But it mentions her name. That was good to find. Rahab hid the spies sent by Joshua to spy Jericho. She was a prostitute, so men coming into her house did not seem unfamiliar. And I think that's exactly why the spies decided to lodge in her house. At first, I thought that her main reason for hiding the spies of a nation that was clearly going to become an enemy to her nation was because she hated her fellow men and women, because of how they had probably treated her being a prostitute. But upon reading the Bible, I realized that her reasons were greater than that. And you're told that in Joshua chapter 2, verse 8 to 11, where she explains her reasons for hiding the spies. Before the men lay down, she came up to them on the roof and said to them, "I know that the Lord has given you the land, and that the fear of you has fallen upon us, and that all the inhabitants of the land melt away before you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea before you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the 2 kings of the Amorites who are beyond the Jordan, to Sihon and Og, whom you devoted to destruction. And as soon as we heard it, our hearts melted, and there was no spirit left in any man because of you. For the Lord your God, He is God in the heavens above and on the earth beneath." She probably knew secrets that her fellow women and some men around her didn't know because of her job, because she clearly breaks it down to the spies of Israel of how they had conquered other nations. She then tells them that it's not about their might, but their secret weapon, which wasn't that secret because God was clearly fighting battles for the Israelites. She says, "For the Lord your God, He is God in the heavens above and on the earth beneath." And she seeks refuge under the God of Israel. After reading that story of Rahab, I asked myself, what exactly qualified Rahab to be used by God to hide the spies of Israel, as in the worldly sense? Because when it came to Moses, some of the things that qualified Moses were, Moses was Pharaoh's grandchild, because we are told that Pharaoh's daughter adopted Moses as her own son. So Moses became Pharaoh's grandchild. And that made it easy for Moses to go into the presence of the king because of his position as his grandchild. Acts chapter 7, verse 20 to 21. At that time Moses was born, and he was beautiful in God's sight, and he was brought up for 3 months in his father's house. And when he was exposed, Pharaoh's daughter adopted him and brought him up as her own son. So Moses was Pharaoh's grandchild. The second thing that qualified Moses was that Moses was knowledgeable of the Egyptian customs. And they are told that in Acts 7, verse 22. "And Moses was instructed in all the wisdom of the Egyptians, and he was mighty in words and deeds." So Moses was very knowledgeable of the Egyptian customs and their religion. And the interesting thing that I found out is that the Egyptians had 10 gods. And that is why God had to use 10 plagues to destroy the land of Egypt, because of their 10 gods. Before, I used to think that God was just showing his power, destroying the land of Egypt using 10 plagues. But finding out that Egyptians actually had 10 gods, and God had to destroy each and every one of their gods to prove his power and his might was just amazing. That was so cool to find. The last point is that Moses was mighty in words and deeds, which he himself was not even aware of, because he told God that he was not good at public speaking. Stephen tells us that in the book of Acts chapter 7 verse 22, where he says, "And Moses was instructed in all the wisdom of the Egyptian, and he was mighty in words and deeds." Back to Rahab. What qualified her? Number one is the fact that she was a prostitute. Men could easily go into her house and no suspicions would be raised, and that is why she was the perfect vessel to be used by the spies of Israel. And we are told that in the book of Joshua chapter 2 verse 1. "And they went and came into the house of a prostitute whose name was Rahab, and lodged there." The second thing that qualified Rahab was the fact that her house was built into the city wall. And we are told that in the book of Joshua chapter 2 verse 15. It says, "Then she let them down by a rope through the window, for her house was built into the city wall, so that she lived in the wall." So that was amazing to find. She could easily let the spies down through her window because her house was built in the city wall. The third thing that qualified Rahab was the fact that she knew the comings and the goings of the pursuers of Jericho. And I think it's because of her location. Her house was built in the city wall, so her window looked outside the city of Jericho. She could see the pursuers going out and coming in, and through that information that she had gathered of the pursuers, she now shared it with the spies of Israel by telling them that the pursuers were going to pursue them for 3 days, and after 3 days they had to go to their land because the pursuers would return back to the city of Jericho. How did God join Rahab in the covenant that he had with the forefathers of Israel? When the Israelites were about to leave Egypt, God gave Moses certain instructions that were and are significant to this day. Number one, they had to paint blood on their doorposts. The blood was so significant, and we are told that in Exodus chapter 12 verse 21 to 22. "Then Moses called all the elders of Israel and said to them, 'Go and select lambs for yourselves according to your clans and kill the Passover lamb. Take a bunch of hyssop and dip it in the blood that is in the basin, and touch the lintel and the 2 doorposts with the blood that is in the basin.'" So they were told to paint their doorposts with blood. In Rahab's case, instead of blood, the spies told Rahab to tie a scarlet cord in the window through which she lets them down. And that is found in Joshua chapter 2 verse 18. The scarlet cord was given to Rahab by the spies. They didn't just tell her to find any scarlet cord, they gave her the scarlet cord. And I think that has some significance, the fact that the scarlet cord had to come from Israel. The Israelites were told to stay inside their houses, to not leave the shelter of their houses. And that is found in Exodus chapter 12 verse 22, where it says, "None of you shall go out of the door of his house until the morning." Rahab was told by the spies to gather her family into her house. We are told that in Joshua chapter 2 verse 18 to 19. "Behold, when you come into the land, you shall tie this scarlet cord in the window through which you let us down, and you shall gather into your house your father and mother, and your brothers, and all your father's household." So she was told to gather her family into her house under one roof. If the Israelites had gone out of their houses stubbornly, in stubbornness, they would have been killed because they would not have been under the covering of the blood on their doorposts. The blood is very important. So is the scarlet cord in Rahab's case. How? Because God explains it in Exodus chapter 12 verse 13 by saying, "The blood shall be a sign for you on the houses where you are, and when I see the blood, I will pass over you, and no plague will befall you to destroy you when I struck the land of Egypt." So the blood is very important. It was like a rescue flag for the Israelites. When the angel of death was walking in the land of Egypt and killing their firstborns, when he came to the land of Israel and saw the blood on their doorpost, he spared their life, not because of their might or their goodness or anything like that, but because of the blood on their doorpost, which is very important. So is the scarlet cord in Rahab's case. When great destruction and terror was in the land of Egypt, the Israelites were protected. Same happens in the case of Rahab. The city wall, where her house is, fell down because of a roar of worship from Israelites. Yet her and her family were safe and sound. And we are told about that in Joshua chapter 6, verse 20 to 23. So the people shouted, and the trumpets were blown. As soon as the people heard the sound of a trumpet, the people shouted a great shout, and the wall fell down flat, so that the people went up into the city, every man straight before him, and they captured the city. Then they devoted all in the city to destruction, both men and women, young and old, oxen, sheep, and donkeys, with the edge of a sword. But to the two men who had spied out the land, Joshua said, "Go into the prostitute's house and bring out from there the woman and all who belong to her, as you saw to her." So the young men who had been spies went in and brought out Rahab and her father and mother and brothers and all who had belonged to her. And they brought all her relatives and put them outside the camp of Israel. And they burnt the city with fire and everything in it. Only the silver and gold and the vessels of bronze and of iron they put in the treasury of the house of the Lord. But Rahab the prostitute and her father's household and all who belonged to her, Joshua saved alive. And she has lived in Israel to this day, because she hid the messengers whom Joshua sent to spy out Jericho. So we find out that when great destruction was happening in the land of Egypt, the Israelites were spared. And the same thing happens to Rahab. When the walls of the city of Jericho were falling down flat, because the Bible says they fell down so flat that if you are standing here, you'd run straight. If you're standing there, you'd go straight. You won't try finding a way into the city. That is how great the walls of Jericho fell. Joshua chapter 6, verse 25. And she has lived in Israel to this day, because she hid the messengers whom Joshua sent to spy out Jericho. So through that one act of kindness, Rahab was joined into the covenant that God had with the forefathers of Israel. And now she gets to share in the blessings of the Israelites. Do we find Rahab anywhere else in the Bible? Or was that it for her? And something amazing is we find her mentioned in the Bible again, Matthew chapter 1, verse 1 to 16. And this is interesting, guys. Mind-blowing. The book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac, and Isaac was the father of Jacob. Jacob was the father of Judah and his brothers. And Judah the father of Perez and Zerah by Tamar. And Perez the father of Hezron, and Hezron the father of Ram. Ram the father of Aminadab. Aminadab the father of Nahshon. Nahshon the father of Salmon. And Salmon the father of Boaz by Rahab. And Boaz the father of Obed by Ruth, and Obed the father of Jesse, Jesse the father of David. We all know David, David the great king. And David was the father of Solomon by the wife of Uriah, Solomon the father of Rehoboam, Rehoboam the father of Abijah, Abijah the father of Asaph, Asaph the father of Jehoshaphat, Jehoshaphat the father of Joram, Joram the father of Uzziah, Uzziah the father of Jotham, Jotham the father of Ahaz, Ahaz the father of Hezekiah, Hezekiah the father of Manasseh, Manasseh the father of Amos, Amos the father of Josiah, Josiah the father of Jeconiah and his brothers at the time of the deportation to Babylon. And after the deportation to Babylon, Jeconiah was the father of Shealtiel, Shealtiel the father of Zerubbabel, Zerubbabel the father of Abiud, Abiud the father of Eliakim, Eliakim the father of Azor, Azor the father of Zadok, Zadok the father of Achim, Achim the father of Eliud, Eliud the father of Eliezer, Eliezer the father of Matan, Matan the father of Jacob, Jacob the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom Jesus was born, who is called Christ. Finding out that the prostitute Rahab became the great grandmother of Jesus Christ. Guys, that was amazing. I did not know that. So God proves over and over again that He takes what the enemy meant for evil and He turns it for good. Rahab did not end up being known as a prostitute forever. She became someone's wife. And you're told that her husband's name was Salmon, who was the father of Boaz. Boaz is very famous in the book of Ruth, which is an incredible thing that happened to her life. And that just shows the greatness of God. When you are joined in His kingdom, like Rahab was joined in the kingdom of God through the Israelites, and she became an Israelite, you realize that God can transform anyone's story. He can change anyone's script, transform it completely when you allow Him to be the author of your story. When you accept God and His salvation, He guides you into realizing that the battle that you fought years back or who you were before will be used in His kingdom for His glory. And you end up reaping fruits from that because He's God and He's mighty and He uses everything that we have in our lives for His glory and for this growing of His kingdom. So that's it from me, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video and hope to see you guys in my next video. Otherwise, bye.